Hi, family. Welcome back once again. Just again, thank you all so much for all the love, all the support that you're showing the Gold Corner. When I first started this and I wanted to create this platform for us parents that have gone through it or parents that are currently going through it, I didn't know I was going to be getting this kind of response. But I just want to thank you all for all the lovely words and messages and just for tuning in every Sunday. So thank you all from the bottom of my heart. It really does mean a lot to us, to all the parents that are here, just to be able to share our warrior story and everything that they went through and everything that they're currently going through. And again, when we say 4%, that is all that we're getting from the actual funding for childhood cancer. Our children only get 4%, and we have to do something about it to change that. And I also, I tell people that childhood cancer is not a commercial that you see for these big hospitals trying to raise money. It's nothing like that. That the children that you see in those commercials, yes, our children, would smile through it all, but they went through some really horrible things that as parents are gonna scar us for life, things that are gonna keep us up at night, and things that we're gonna unfortunately carry with us, until God decides to reunite us with our children. So again, I just want to say thank you to everybody for all the support. So we're in week 3 of Childhood Cancer Awareness, September Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, week 3, and these stories just keep getting, more powerful. And, just to hear these stories every week is something that to me is life-changing, is something that to me, it just makes me cherish a lot of things a lot more. And it makes me, it makes my faith grow every single week more and more. This week, week number 3, we're going to be listening to another powerful story of a little girl who is also named Mia. And what's interesting here is this little girl, Mia Grace, has the same name as my daughter. My daughter's name is Mia Seone. Seone means La Gracia de Dios, grace in Spanish. So they are twins. So Mia Grace, we're going to be hearing this beautiful, powerful story. They are also from Newport News, Virginia. Again, I just want to welcome Michelle Moore. Thank you so much, Michelle. Thank you for accepting to be a part of the Gold Corner. Thank you for being here with us. Thank you, because I know that the story, from what I saw on Facebook, it's a real powerful story, and our children need to be talked about. Again, everything that they went through. So, Michelle, welcome to the Gold Corner. Thank you for accepting to have me here, and I can't wait to hear your warrior story. So the floor is yours, Michelle.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to be honest, I'm probably going to cry a lot through this. This is very, very fresh for me, as Mia just passed away on May 20th of this year. So it's really, really fresh still, but I'm going to do my best to get through it and share her story, because it deserves to be shared, and our kids deserve so much better. So please bear with me throughout this. So if you can see it, this here is my Mia Grace. Mia was born on July 17th of 2016, and she was my wished for child. I had Mia on my own by choice, and I tried for her for quite some time, and when I finally got her, she was everything I wanted. She was just an amazing little girl. Her personality was so big and so strong, and I think that's what makes all of this harder too, because she truly filled our walls, everything about her. She was the baby, but she ran the house. So Mia was diagnosed with diffuse intrinsic pontine glioma, or DIPG, otherwise often called the monster. She was diagnosed in January of 2019. Getting her diagnosed was crazy, which, I know for a lot of parents it is, because a lot of the symptoms you see with childhood cancer can resemble so many other things. And doctors and people look at it as so rare that their first thought is not cancer. So, Mia actually started having some weird sleeping symptoms. She started like jerking in her sleep. She would laugh in her sleep. And again, that started in like October. So, and, I took her to the doctor, and, they were like, oh, it sounds like night terrors, And I said, okay, but, it looks really weird to me. So, but I sat with that, but at that point I was already not sleeping. I would sit up at night and I would watch her in her sleep. And I would just watch, and I kept saying, something's not right with my baby. And at this point she was 2. And I just knew. So we get to end of December of 2018, and her sleep symptoms start getting worse. She's jerking a bit more. And, I'm just like, it looks like seizure activity, So I took her to the emergency room. This is at the end of December. And the staff at the emergency room, the doctor, I had recorded her in her sleep. And I showed him the video, and, he looked at her while she was awake and said, she looks like a normal 2-year-old to me. I think she's fine, and I'm actually a hospital social worker. So, I've worked in hospitals and in the medical field long enough. And then, those mama instincts are strong. And I said, something's not right, and he said to me, well, if you need to, you bring her back. I'm here. I get paid by the hour, which of course I was pretty upset about. But at that point I was more focused on getting my daughter what she needed. So over the course of the next 10 days, I took Mia to the emergency room 4 times. I took her back a couple days later to a different hospital. I took her to our local children's hospital, and they admitted her for an overnight sleep study to see if there was seizure activity. So on the camera, they could see her jerking, but the test said that there was no seizure activity. So of course, I'm still very frustrated and upset, because I'm like, I'm not getting answers and I know something's wrong. The doctor at that point told me she had restless leg syndrome. And I said to him, it's not just her lower extremities, it's her arms, it's her face, her mouth is going, her eyes, although they're shut, you can see that they're blinking, I said, something's not right. And I'll never forget, he said to me, well, what do you want me to diagnose her with? This is the best diagnosis she can have. And I said, it's not the best if it's wrong. So that was extremely frustrating, but I knew something was wrong. So he said, well, if you want, you can get her an MRI. They weren't going to do it in the hospital, but he said I could do it outpatient. So I went home and I immediately started making phone calls. I took her to her primary care doctor. I said, listen, we just got released from the hospital. They said she could get an MRI. I need you to order it for me. And her doctor said, sure, I'll order it, and they scheduled it for me. They scheduled it for a couple weeks out because that was available in the schedule. I said, this isn't good enough. So I spent the day calling and trying to get her appointment moved up for an MRI. Finally, I got through to someone and they said, we can move it up a little bit. It was, I want to say it was in like a week or something. So, but Mia ended up getting this terrible headache, and I took her back to the emergency room to our local children's hospital. And the resident that saw her basically talked me out of having her scanned. She said, if we do a CT scan, which the CT and the MRI, are very different, but she said the CT scan put her at higher risk for developing cancers, that the radiation was very risky to her. And although, again, I've worked in a hospital for a very long time, I know it's a very routine scan, but here is my little 2-year-old, and I don't want to put more on her than I have to. So I took her home and I said, well, we're going to get this MRI outpatient. And I want to say the next night, I was driving the car and Mia was screaming. I thought she was upset about her favorite song going off on the radio. Again, I said she had a very strong personality, and what she wanted and didn't, she made it known. But then we got home and she coughed. And when she coughed, she fell out on the floor. And she grabbed her head. She said, ow, and she just yelled. And I knew something was wrong, and I knew that it was terribly wrong. So, it was just crazy, because I'm like, okay, she's been to the hospital. I've taken her to the ED, So they said by the third time, they thought, okay, well, headache. They looked at her neuro check. She's walking fine. She looks okay. They look at her pupils. They're okay. The plan is still outpatient MRI. So went home. Happened again. Now, all of this is within a 10-day time span. It happened again, and I'm like, this is, I'm getting answers. I'm not waiting again. Now, I remember going to work and, of course, freaking out at work the whole day before, taking her to the emergency room that last time. And I said to my boss, I said, they're going to scan her. They're going to give her an MRI. And I'll never forget, my boss said, what if they don't find anything? And I looked at her and I said, they're going to find something. I just knew. I didn't know anything about DIPG. I had never heard of it. But I knew my daughter had something wrong, and I knew it was something in her head. I didn't know brain tumor or fluid buildup or what, but I knew something was wrong. So after, her falling out, on the floor and everything, and I remember panicking, calling my family to come get my son so I could get her to the emergency room, because I knew we were going to be staying. And we got there, and finally somebody listened. So we got there and they said, look, yes, there are some risks, but I'd rather know what's going on. She was telling us exactly where her pain was. And she was just shy of 2.5, and she could tell me it was here. So they did a CT scan, and I'll never forget, 3 people walked in the room after her scan, and I just knew it was horrible news. And they said to me, she had some type of mass at the base of her skull, just where she was grabbing. They said they couldn't, of course, tell me what it was yet, but they were going to admit her to the pediatric ICU, and that she would have an MRI the following day. So they gave her some steroids to help with the pain. The pain at that point, it wasn't a constant thing, but if she would cough or sneeze, the increased pressure from doing that would just make her fall out in pain. So they gave her some steroids, and she was able to relax and sleep. And, I just kind of prepared myself for whatever was to come. They admitted us to the pediatric ICU, and, it's so crazy, because we get up there and, if anybody's ever been in one, the mood is just somber already. You've got all these machines and these kids, hooked up to all these machines. Every second there's something beeping going off, something's going wrong, and here I am with my little girl, just, she wasn't herself. I mean, Mia was always happy and energetic, and she just looked so miserable, and I couldn't do anything to help her. So finally, we got admitted. It was wee hours of the morning, probably around like 3 o'clock or so. And I'll never forget, before we got upstairs, when they admitted her. And of course I burst out in tears, and she looked at me and she told me to shut up. And, I was like, of course she doesn't want to see me cry. And then she started to get upset. So I'm like, okay, I've got to, dial it back. But she had her MRI done. And I remember it got really late that night, and I'm like, is somebody going to tell me something? And they're like, well, the person who reads the scans is probably gone for the night. And I'm like, oh, no. I need to know something, And they said, well, did Dr. Mark come and see you? And I said, no. So they said, okay, well, let us call, So they called, and before I knew it, there was another 3 people coming up to the room to talk to me. And I said, something about that number 3, and I said, well, I again knew it was devastating news because they needed backup. So she said to me, yes, it is a tumor, that she has the base of her skull. And I remember, saying, oh my gosh, is it a glioma? And she said, well, it's a type, and she said, she mentioned diffuse intrinsic pontine glioma. And here I am, I'm like, I don't know what that is. I just know, from my job and what I do, that when I hear glioma, or I know it's a death sentence, And when she told me what DIPG was, the first words out of my mouth were, how long does she have? Because I knew. And she told me 1 to 2 years. And I just folded. Like, here I am looking at my little girl who hasn't even hit 2.5. And I'm being told that in a year or 2, I'm going to have to say goodbye. And I remember the next thing being, what am I going to tell my son? Like I said, Brendan is my son, Mia's big brother, and from day one, they were best friends. So I just kept saying, what am I going to tell him? And so we talked about a lot of different options, but the big takeaway from our discussion that night was there is no cure. Nothing is guaranteed, and that you should take her home and make memories, because one day that's going to be all you have. So I remember waking up that night, and Mia slept with me. I co-slept from day one with her. So I'm laying in the hospital bed with her in my arms. And I remember waking up in the middle of that night thinking that this was all a dream. And I looked down at her with all these tubes and blood pressure cuffs and the monitors. And I'm like, my God, this is real. My baby is going to die. So, things just kept getting crazier and crazier, but I told myself, I was going to do everything I could for her. So, I think that next day we were able to move out of the ICU and go in to a regular room. Mia had perked up a little bit. The steroids, she was on dexamethasone, and a lot of cancer families know that med, and it's a gift and a curse. It's a really potent steroid, so it helped with the swelling, it helped with the pain, but it came with a lot of side effects. But at the same time, I couldn't sit there and see her suffer, so I knew it was needed. Mia, they tried to wean her steroids. They wanted her on about half the dose by the time she was discharged, but they couldn't. Her tumor was already pretty much filling her pons, so there was really no room for any more swelling, which was why she was in so much pain. So, we were in the hospital for, I want to say, another day or 2. And just being there, it was so crazy. I had people coming in and talking about hospice and talking about Make-A-Wish and all these things. And I'm like, I'm still trying to wrap my head around this crazy diagnosis. I'd been Googling all night, of course. But I mean, everything was just so real, and it came at us so fast. And, it was just me. I'm a single mom, and I'm very thankful. I do have a great village, behind us. But at the end of the day, it was just me there. It was hard. I didn't even want to leave her, to go to the bathroom. I just wanted to be with her every second. But when she was finally discharged, so within the next day or two, she came home on 16 milligrams a day of dexamethasone. So for people who are familiar with that medication, that's a lot. She was on so many meds. I mean, I had alarms set on my phone to give her medication. I want to say like every 2 to 3 hours, she was getting something. She was getting a medication to try to help pull fluid off of the brain. She was getting the dexamethasone to help with the swelling. She was getting pain relievers to help, of course, ease more of the pain. She had nausea medications because another, symptom of the tumor was to make her vomit from all the excess pressure from the fluid in her brain. So, but it was just, I said, crazy. At this point, she hadn't really lost a lot of her functioning or anything. She was a little wobbly, and, kind of in retrospect, after she was diagnosed, I had told the doctor, I'm like, she's falling, which isn't her norm. And, the night before I took her to the ER, I'm like, she's crawling. And I'm like, Mia's been walking for, a year, over a year. I'm like, but I noticed she's crawling more. So finally we get home, and the following day, I want to say after getting home, we were already back at clinic. So we were at the oncology clinic at our local children's hospital. And we were working on a plan to get her started for radiation. With DIPG, there's no treatment. There's palliative radiation, which isn't treatment, but it's 6 weeks of radiation to hopefully shrink the tumor a bit, not cure it, not get it to disappear, but to shrink it a little bit to help ease up symptoms and to hopefully extend life a little bit. So what we ended up doing, so we went to clinic that day. She went down to, the oncologist, which was great. The radiation oncologist at our local children's hospital was great. They got her worked in so fast. So the next day we came up, and actually the same day, I believe, we went down and she was fitted for her radiation mask. So actually pretty sure I have her masks still in here somewhere. But what they do, they do another CT scan, and they fit this mold to her head so that she can wear it during radiation treatments. So she got fitted, and then the following day she started radiation. So radiation was hell. I don't even know another way to describe it. Everything about it was hard. She had to do this Monday through Friday for 6 weeks total. And again, she had just hit, within a little over a week after she was diagnosed, she had just hit 2.5. So she didn't understand any of this. Her radiation appointment, they have to fit her in the schedule, and it was late in the day. She had like a 2 p.m. or 2:30 slot. And for radiation, you have to be NPO or nothing by mouth. So she couldn't eat, she couldn't drink, and she's on a buttload of dexamethasone. And so for those who know anything about that medication, it makes you ravenous. You just want to eat, and she couldn't. So it also makes you aggressive. And so here she was, not knowing what's going on, having to have all these things done to her. She's hungry. She just doesn't get any of it. So she was upset. And again, Mia had a strong personality from day. She was very vocal about everything. And she had actually, before we got released from the hospital, she had a PICC line put in. So we didn't do a chemo port for her because the goal was not to keep it there. We knew that traditional chemo didn't work for DIPG, so there was no need to put a traditional port in her chest. So she had the PICC line put in her arm, so they wouldn't have to stick her every day. So for radiation, she had to be put to sleep every day because she was little, didn't understand it, and needed to sit still, And let me tell you, it was hard. I mean, the medications were hard for her. Waking up from them was really tough, but her being put down every day was the worst. She was already scared. She didn't like strangers, didn't like to be touched. And here are all these people. She's going into this room with this big machine, and she was terrified. And so we did everything we could to make her comfortable while doing it. So I started holding her while they put her to sleep. And I will never forget the feeling of my little girl being put to sleep and feeling her go limp in my arms. And, everybody wants to say from the beginning, be strong, have faith. And I knew in my heart from the beginning that this was going to take my baby. So, feeling her body go limp in my arms every time was like practice for her dying. So hard. But we did it. She did it, and I must say her team was amazing, from the anesthesiologist to her PICU nurses her PACU nurses, where she would have to go to recovery and wake up each time. But she got through 6 weeks of radiation. She fought through it. And during that time, still being on dexamethasone, within, I want to say, 3 to 4 weeks, she had put on over 30 pounds. For a 2.5-year-old, that's a lot of weight. So she had lost her ability to stand up on her own. Between the tumor and the excess weight, she wasn't really able to talk much. She could grunt and she could say a few things, but she was losing her speech. She started losing her ability to swallow. So she did okay with food, but she had a lot of trouble with liquids. So I had to put thickener in her liquids to thicken them up, to give her throat a little bit more time to do what it needed to do, so that she wasn't aspirating liquid right into her lungs. It was crazy. I watched my little girl go from being this energetic, perfect little toddler to starting to become trapped in her own body. She would get so frustrated because she couldn't get out what she wanted to say, between the disease and the meds, it was stealing so much from her. But she was a fighter, let me tell you. After she finished radiation, we really worked hard to get her weaned off of the steroids. We were able to wean her some during radiation. And then eventually we were able to get her completely off of the dexamethasone, which was great. Shortly after she finished, a couple weeks after finishing radiation, she actually had her Make-A-Wish trip. And again, this is still, she was diagnosed in January. We did Make-A-Wish in March. When you have a terminal diagnosis, things like that kind of work and happen really fast. But she had a ball. We went to Disney World. She, even despite, difficulty walking, she did amazing. She actually started walking more at Disney than she had walked in weeks. Mickey Mouse was truly magical for her. But I'll never forget, we had one night, we went to dinner while on her Make-A-Wish. And I mean, we were having a wonderful time. And I remember sitting at dinner in the middle of this restaurant and just falling all to pieces. I remember the manager of the restaurant came over to me and asked what was wrong. And I was just falling apart. And it was hard because I did my best not to cry in front of my son, because, you know, I didn't want to scare him until I had to. I didn't want him to hurt. I wanted him to enjoy the time with his sister. But I just fell apart. And I'll never forget the staff that night. They said, stick around at the end of the night. You know, it was dinner time. But we stayed, and they had all of the characters come over to her and to our table. They gave each of my kids gifts, and they spent, you know, so much time with both of them, which it truly was magical. It was amazing. But again, it was like, this is great, but if she wasn't dying, we wouldn't need this. You know, it sucks because when your kid's terminal, it's like that cloud is always over your head, no matter what. There could be so much joy in the room, but there will always be that cloud. And it was definitely always there for me. But I said, Mia, she did really, really well after that for a while. Over the next couple of months, and she was able to wean completely off steroids. Mia was able to walk, talk, laugh, do everything that she did before. It was a nice little honeymoon period for us. It was hard, because again, she still had to be in clinic all the time. So, I mean, things weren't back to normal, but they were as normal as we could have wanted and expected at that time. But Mia actually, right after radiation, got into a clinical trial, which everything kind of happened at the same time everything else was happening. So it was kind of weird. But we did a clinical trial up in DC at Children's National, where she had to go. We went to DC a couple of times, but the goal was to take her T cells out of her body through a blood draw and in some way train them to fight her particular type of cancer, and then put them back into her with the hopes that it would save her, or at least, help give her some more time. So actually, while she was on her Make-A-Wish trip, we actually had to go down to one of the local hospitals to have her blood drawn and sent back to DC so they could separate her T cells. I was really thankful, actually, her doctor in DC was able to coordinate that with the hospital in Florida, so we didn't have to cancel her wish trip, because of course us trying this trial was extremely important. At that point, I would have done almost anything for her except anything that was going to really hurt her quality of life. I knew that the time she had was limited, so I wanted her to be able to enjoy whatever time she could. So even though it was still very taxing on her physically and emotionally, this only consisted of, some needle pokes and lab draws. So we did the trial, and part of the trial, when they take the blood out, you have to have a certain number of T cells to continue and actually get the treatment. So I'll never forget getting the call the first time around saying that she didn't have enough T cells. When they did her blood draw, they take out the max amount, of blood they can based on the child's weight. They had to take I mean, it was vials of blood. I want to say more than 10 vials. And I'm like, I put her through all this. We had to go to DC, multiple times. And again, we're in Virginia, Newport News. So we drove each time about 3 hours or so to go stay in DC overnight, to go and have the lab draws and then pray that things would work out. So when I got that first call saying that she didn't have enough and, they couldn't give her the experimental treatment, my God, I was so broken. I'm like, I felt like this was our only chance at even a little bit of hope. And I'll never forget, her doctor said, the doctor from the trial, he said, he reached out to the lab and said, we need to do this again. Typically, if you didn't have enough cells, that was it. You didn't get a second chance. The spots were limited. So, but he said, look, this is a little girl's life and we need to try again for her. And so they did. And, at that point I felt like, okay, doors are starting to open. I was just so thankful. I had prayed about it. All of our loved ones and people who followed her story, were praying. And I'm like, thank God, prayers are being answered. So I was so thankful. So we put her through it again. She had to go and have 2 separate blood draws. And then we just had to wait a couple of weeks to see if her T cells would grow and that they would have enough to infuse them back into her. And I think the waiting was the hardest because with DIPG, time isn't on your side. You're told from the beginning, 1 to 2 years, but the average survival time is actually only 9 months from the time you're diagnosed with DIPG. So, here we are already months in, and I'm like, I'm being told to wait. I can't wait. I need things to happen. But the second time worked, thankfully. They were able to get enough T cells, and before I knew it, we were headed back to DC for her to have her first T cell infusion. So I think the best part of our traveling to DC was Ronald McDonald House. She loved it. Let me tell you, they have all the game rooms and the playgrounds, and it was nice because by this time, physically, she had all of her functioning back. So she could run and jump and play and do the things that a normal 2.5-year-old would. So, but we went back. She only had enough for 2 treatments, but I felt it was better than nothing. It was, worth a shot. So we went and we did it. And then we just kind of had to wait to see if it would help. So in the meantime, while we were waiting, Mia turned 3. And I remember being so happy. And of course, a mixture of sadness, but I didn't think she'd make that 3rd birthday. I remember looking at her when she was diagnosed and watching her lose her functioning and watch her, not be able to talk to me. And I just didn't think she'd see it. So every year we would go to Sesame Place. That was our thing for her birthday. And we went. And it was amazing. We packed so much into that birthday trip. The Crayola experience. So it's the Crayola factory. We did all kinds of stuff, and she really did have an amazing birthday. She got the VIP treatment for all the parades and all that. And it was just amazing to be able to watch her enjoy it, to see her really be able to be present and participate in everything she wanted. So that was amazing. I remember one night we were getting back to the hotel, and said she ran around, played, did her thing the entire time. But the only, when you looked at her, people saw her, nobody would ever know that she was battling brain cancer. But of course, me being her mom, I noticed everything, and we were going to the elevator, and she was walking, and I noticed it was harder for her to pick up her feet. She was, really struggling. I could see her, going side to side and really trying to lift up her feet as she walked, but she was determined to not be in her stroller. So I let her walk, but, it was hard seeing her struggle so much, especially because she was doing so well. So again, there's that dark cloud, just reminding me that, hey, cancer is still a part of your life. But we really, really did enjoy, that birthday. But at the same time, I'm like, will she see 4? So after that, her birthday was in July. This was July 2019. And then August came around, and Mia had been doing well. Again, her tumor had shrunk from the radiation. She was off of the dexamethasone. She really wasn't on any meds, actually. At one point, again, she was doing so amazing. And August came, and I'll never forget my family. So my family had come to visit, and they wanted to do something one day. And I said, Mia's, doing some weird sleeping stuff again. I think I'm just going to watch her today. And I'm going to reach out to her doctor and see what her doctor says. So she was starting to laugh a little bit again in her sleep. And my mama heart knew that her tumor was starting to grow again. Other than that, though, she wasn't in pain again or anything. Her doctor said, well, we can, scan her and see what's going on. But so finally, come September, she was starting to have a bit more symptoms again. Still overall doing okay, but she was starting to show more signs of disease progression, and her tumor was growing. And in September, I got the bombshell that, her tumor was growing again. And again, my mama heart knew. I always did all of Mia's appointments by myself. I was used to being a single mom. I said, look, I can handle this. I have to be strong for her. This particular appointment, even though I had not gotten official results, I called in some backup. And because I knew I didn't need to be by myself, because I knew we were going to get horrible news. So, she had her MRI, and her doctor walked in, and I could just tell by the look on her face. And she said her tumor is back where it was when she was diagnosed. So her tumor had shrank probably about 60% by the time she hit the 6-week mark after radiation. So that was March, April. And by September, it had already completely grown back. So she, I didn't want to do it, but we went back on steroids. She wasn't on as high of a dose as she was initially, but she had to be back on them. I remember we had another Disney World trip booked because, we love Disney World. It was our happy place. And, Make-A-Wish, she had the most amazing time. And I wanted to take her back while she could fully enjoy it, And I remember getting home and frantically making calls because her oncologist told me you need to move it up to as soon as possible. So we went in October. We went to Disney again, and it was probably more magical this time around than the first time. She was again back on steroids. So there were, the side effects from the steroids impacting her again. So me needing to thicken her liquids again, her being hungry all the time. But despite all of that, she was able to have a good time. Another side effect, a lot of people don't realize is the dexamethasone messes with blood pressure as well. So Me, I had hypertension throughout this whole journey. Here I am in my 30s and I've got high blood pressure, and people are like, oh my gosh, you're young to have that. And here she was at 3, 2 and 3, and needing to be on blood pressure meds. So, I mean, it was scary, but I was determined to do everything that we could with whatever time she had left. It was easy when she was doing well, to not think every second about DIPG and what it would do to her. But, the thought was always there. But I mean, we did so much. I think within a couple of days of getting home from Disney that time, we spent a weekend in the Outer Banks in North Carolina. I mean, we did all kind of stuff. We traveled. She loved it. She always asked to go on an airplane. And I thought it was real important for us to take that time to make memories, because again, knowing one day that would be all that we had. So fast forward a little bit, we hit December and we went to Disney again. It was funny, but people are like, oh my gosh, they're going again. And I'm like, my daughter's dying. I will give her everything I can, while she's here. And when we moved the trip up before, we were supposed to go during Christmas time. So I said, I had been saying all of my son's life, I wanted to take him during Christmas time, and I never had the opportunity to do it. So we made it happen. And thankfully, with a lot of help, from our community and things too, we were able to go again, which, I'll never forget seeing the joy in her face, seeing it snow on Main Street in Disney. She was just so fascinated. And like I said, it just was amazing to be able to give her those moments and let her feel normal, to have the moments without all of the needle pokes and, to be out and about and not stuck in clinic. I mean, Mia had to go to clinic every week. She had a little time where she was able to go like every other week, but it didn't last long because her tumor started to progress. So, as we started approaching January of 2020, my mind is already racing, because here she was already past the median survival time of 9 months, and how we were coming up on a year from her diagnosis. And I'm like, I felt like we were on borrowed time at that point. And, she hit the year mark and her tumor started getting really aggressive. She started being in pain more, started noticing more of the symptoms. She again got to that point where she couldn't really stand by herself. She needed help. She was able to walk if I was holding her. She could take her steps, but, a lot of weakness. So that was a struggle. And finally, we hit a point where they were agreeable to doing radiation again. Typically, once we found out the first time that her tumor was growing, we actually did apply for her to get into another trial. And we were actually able to get a trial medication under something called compassionate use, where we didn't have to travel for a trial. She was able to get the medication in her home clinic. But it was still a process getting her into that. And she would get that medication every week. She would take it orally, and it got to be a fight. We hit that, I want to say even before we hit the year mark, and like between the steroids and her being angry, and she was tired. She was tired of being in clinic. She was tired of being poked. She was tired of taking medications. And it was the worst feeling to have to hold her down and force her to take medication. She didn't want it. And again, she was young. She didn't understand. But, here I am thinking I'm helping her. But I had so many days where I'm like, at what point do I stop? What point do I just let her go? And let me tell you, I wasn't there. I wasn't there. So she started taking ONC 201. which is an experimental medication. She started taking that in November. And then, in January, when we found out that her tumor, was really getting aggressive and growing, it had even spread outside of the area that it was when she was first diagnosed. So, and, it was like, I had to kind of figure out what I wanted and what I wanted to push for. And it was really hard because her regular oncologist was actually on maternity leave. So, and although everybody in the practice where we went, was great, it was different because I wasn't with the person who we had been with from the beginning. But, and it was like, well, if we do radiation again, which her radiation oncologist didn't want to do, radiation doesn't come without risks. Just like in the beginning, doing radiation was risky because her tumor was already filling her pons. And initially, radiation can make the tumor swell. And there wasn't room for swelling. So here we were again coming up against those same risks. And her tumor was bigger this time. And also, typically with radiation, they want to see a certain amount of time go past before they do it again for safety reasons. And it was like a year they wanted, and it had not been a full year yet. But the stars aligned, prayers once again were answered, and we were able to do radiation a second time. The other thing about doing it a second time, though, was I was told that we would probably have to stop the trial medication, because even though we were getting it at her own clinic, we were basically still on a trial. So everything we did, we had to get permission from the drug company that was making the medication. And I was like, I don't want to stop them. I'm like, please just beg them. Who do I have to talk to? Who do I have to reach out to, so that she can get the radiation, hopefully extend her life a little bit, and hopefully give this medication time to work. The medication wasn't working yet, but, I was talking to other parents who had used it, and they said they didn't see any benefits until 4 to 6 months after starting it. So I was like, I want to give this medication time. I want to try it. Again, stars aligned. We were blessed, and they gave us the go-ahead and allowed us to do the experimental medication alongside of radiation. So we did it. This time radiation was only 12 sessions, not 30. 12 was the max, and her radiation oncologist made it very clear that he would not do radiation to her brain again, that this was our last chance. Basically, they told me, if we did any more than we had done, we would basically melt her brain. That just goes to show you like how powerful this treatment is, but yet it's not powerful enough to kill this tumor. So she did her 12 rounds of radiation, second go around. And I mean, we had been there before. We had done it. We were able to get a little bit of an earlier slot this time, so it wasn't as torturous, her being NPO all day. But it was still hard. She was on steroids, she was hungry. She, again, didn't understand everything. But we did it. I had to, again, feel my daughter go limp in my arms before every treatment as they put her to sleep. And, here we are over a month since diagnosis now. And, everybody in the DIPG world knows once you hit progression, it's not good. When the tumor grows back, it's typically more aggressive. So it grows faster and is less responsive to any treatment. So at this point now, I'm just like praying to God that He saw fit to save my child. DIPG is pretty much 100% fatal. And, I kept asking myself, why would he choose to save my child and he's not saving everybody else's? You know, I mean, over the course of that year that I had already watched and followed so many pages and saw so many kids die. And here I am, you know, asking God for something as if we were special. And that was tough, you know. But again, we continued to fight. Mia continued to fight. She did everything that she could. We finally, you know, got to a point where she started completely refusing to take all of her medications. And part of me is like, Michelle, she's telling you she's done. But again, I wasn't ready to let go or give up. So at this point, she had an NG tube put in. So it's a feeding tube. For those that don't know, it goes down back of her throat and into her stomach. So let me tell you, she called it her tubie. And at first, oh my God, she hated it. I mean, of course, she's got this weird thing, you know, you can feel it. It's hanging on the outside of her face, and hated it. But it ended up being a real blessing for her and I. It made me feel a little bit better knowing that I could get all of her medications into her. And I didn't have to stress her out to do it. She didn't have to swallow anything. So, I mean, it worked out. She scared the crap out of me when she first got it. They had this thing on it attached called a bridle. So basically the bridle kind of clamped the tube in place, and if she tried to pull it, it would hurt. So we had the bridle on her, I want to say for maybe a couple days, a week max. And I was like, look, she's not messing with it. It's really annoying though, I can tell, let's take it off, you know? And I'm like, okay. On the way home from the hospital, I look back and she's like, Mom. And the tube is like hanging out of her nose. So she pulled it out. Here we are, like in a tunnel. So I can't stop and pull over or anything. And I'm just looking back. I'm like, holy crap. So I had to pull it the rest of the way out because I couldn't push it back in because, you know, it's too risky. You have to make sure that they're placed, you know, in the right way. You don't want to put it down into the lungs or anything, you know. So, but thankfully, she was still going to the hospital every day at that point. So they were able to put it back in for her. And we went with the bridle again. But, you know, it's just another one of those things where, I mean, and I've seen them a million times, you know, working in a hospital, I've seen all kinds of feeding tubes, but I never imagined, you know, my 3-year-old having a feeding tube. And we would go places, you know, and kids would ask, what's that? And for me, I had no problem explaining. You know, I thought it was very important. I didn't want kids to look at her like, oh my God, there's something wrong with her and I can't play with this kid, you know? But it was just weird because again, you know, I just never imagined her having to go through all this stuff. In February, she had just finished radiation not too long ago, the second time, and we took a trip to Georgia. So Mia loved aquariums. So I wanted to take her to the Georgia Aquarium. And I did. And we had an organization actually come and do a photo shoot with us while at the aquarium. You know, this organization really focused on helping families make and, you know, record memories. So it was really nice. The Georgia Aquarium was gracious enough to actually allow us in before the facility even opened. They gave us a tour of everything. You know, we got VIP seating to shows. It was amazing and heartbreaking at the same time. You know, it was kind of like her Make-A-Wish. Why are we here? Because she's dying. And, This was kind of, bucket list thing. You don't think of kids having bucket lists, but when you're, dying of brain cancer, you want to give, your child you want to try to fit in a lifetime of memories in the little bit of time that you have. So, and again, she was back. She had put on all the weight again. She was back on a ton of meds. She had the NG tube now. I mean, we had gone right back to where we were when we started. But this time it was even more real because I knew we were out of options. But again, we did everything we could to have a really great time. The steroids made it hard at times because, again, she got pretty angry, pretty aggressive at times. But we pushed through it. So then comes COVID. So, I had already started getting nervous about, the virus, because we like to travel and things. And we got back and it was like end of February. We got back from Georgia and I was like, so much for traveling anymore. I was too afraid. I said, she is already at risk because of everything she's got going on. I didn't want to put her more at risk, and have something take her life before cancer could. So, and then it was like, the pandemic, everything just exploded. And I remember, our state kind of went on lockdown and everything. And I said to myself, she's going to die during this pandemic. I said, we're going to be shut in here because it's safest. We're going to be home. And this is the time I'm supposed to be creating memories with her. And I can't, so I did everything I could to really make home as special as I could for her. Both my kids already had more toys than they knew what to do with. But we did everything at home that we could, I remember putting Christmas lights up on our balcony. We still had our Christmas tree up. But just anything I could do to give her a little bit more joy. Things already, again, weren't normal for her. She couldn't walk on her own. She was having the swallowing difficulties. She could still crawl. So she was able to get around and play and enjoy herself. But again, things were different and she was declining. So she did really, she kind of stayed and plateaued there for a little bit. And then I'll never forget March 17th. I was craving cake. And I said, I put in a grocery order to be delivered and I'm like, I'm going to get birthday cake, and Mia loved junk food. She was definitely my twin. She loved cupcakes. She called them pup cakes. So they are forever pup cakes now, but she loved birthday cake, loved singing the happy birthday song. But I bought a cake that day, an ice cream cake. And, even though it wasn't any of our birthdays, the cake, it had happy birthday on it, and I said, well, I didn't order a birthday cake, but, it says happy birthday. So we're going to put candles in the cake and we're going to sing to her and let her blow out the candles. She was so excited. And, she just grinned and stared at the cake while we sang, and she blew out her candles. And, I happened to put 4 candles on the cake because those were all the candles I had. And she was just a couple months shy of her 4th birthday. And I remember after she blew the candles out, she asked me, could she touch the cake? And I said, yeah, it's your cake. You do what you want. But by this time, she was losing some of her movement on one side of her body. So it was her left hand didn't work as well as she wanted. And I watched her struggle just to put her hands in the cake and bring it up to her mouth. But she did it with a grin. It was so crazy. Here it was, she was losing control of her own body, but she smiled through it all. At this time she was off of the steroids again. She was getting something called Avastin, to try to help replace the steroids. And it did. But again, now she was at a point in her progression that she needed the steroids, but I didn't want them. You know, the steroids, not only do they have a million and one side effects, but I mean, the way it changed her personality, I just couldn't do that to her again. I just made her so unhappy, so moody all the time. And if her time was limited, I wanted her to be happy and to be able to enjoy it as much as she could. But again, on that day, I watched her, stick her little hand in the cake. And I didn't know that was the last time we'd be able to sing happy birthday to her. So on May 19th, she woke up in the morning and she had a headache. And she had been having a headache for a couple days. She had just had a clinic visit, the week prior, actually days prior. And, no problem. She got her meds, she got her infusion, she did everything she needed to do. But she was having that hand weakness. But her doctor wasn't super alarmed, neither was I. But when she woke up on the 19th and she had a headache and she vomited, I knew. I remember just breaking down in tears. I called her doctor, I called her nurse. And I'm like, something's not right. Vomiting for a brain tumor child is like, it's a huge red flag. And Mia had vomiting in the very beginning, but it really wasn't something that she dealt with the entire time while she was diagnosed. Once it happened, I knew, we're nearing the end. I took her to clinic. Her doctor asked me if I wanted her to have a CT scan. And I said, yeah. And she asked me, well, if we get a scan and it's growing, how will that change our course of treatment? Because Mia really was terrified of scans. And, we talked about different clinical trials that were out there. But because Mia had a second round of radiation, she wasn't eligible for any other experimental treatment. So, her doctor, we talked about, and she asked me again about a scan. And I said, even if it won't change the course of her treatment, I need to know if I have to say goodbye to my baby. And Mia was laying in my arms at this point, and I'm just looking down at her, and she wasn't herself. She'd been in pain. She'd been vomiting all day. This was a long day at the hospital. I mean, she got meds. They added all these new pain meds. She had to have an ultrasound of her arm because she complained of arm pain. We wanted to check for blood clots. It was a long, horrible day for her. But even in the midst of it all, once they got her comfortable, she was able to smile a little. I remember on the TV in clinic, the new Trolls movie had recently come out, and it came on. And we had already watched it several times at home, but it was her favorite. And she sat there and she watched, and she kind of danced along a little bit. So, I was able to see her smile a little bit, not much, but the light was still there a little bit in her eyes. So we went home that night. She was getting pain meds around the clock. She now had a fentanyl patch to help manage the pain. Remember, we had pizza that night for dinner. Pizza was another one of her favorites. And, she watched a movie. She had her pizza. And although she still wasn't fully herself, we got to do some of the things she loved. So I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat and I watched her. And her breathing was really, really weird. She would take 2 normal breaths, and then her breathing would pause for like 10 seconds. And then she'd take 2 breaths again, and her breathing would pause. And I said, I know she was on a lot of pain meds and things. I didn't freak out at that point, but I knew We were getting close. I didn't know how close, but I knew we were getting close. So the next morning, her hospice nurse, Miss Teresa, who she was amazing throughout this whole process, but it was her day off. She called me and she said, "How's Mia?" She would always call when something was going on with Mia, whether she was off or not. She'd call and check on her. And I said, "Something's not right, you know." She woke up, she was in pain, a lot of pain. I just couldn't get her pain managed. I mean, she was on morphine and had a fentanyl patch and just couldn't get her pain managed. So then, you know, I was talking to another one of the nurses from our hospice agency, and while on the phone, you know, they were saying, "Do you want us to come out?" And I said, "Yeah, I want you to come out and see her," you know. And while on the phone with one of the nurses, Mia had a seizure. And you know, I didn't realize what it was when it first started happening. She just screamed out and her body stiffened. And she just reached for me and I just picked her up. She told me to pick her up. And I just held her, and her body, one side of her body just was stiff. I couldn't bend her leg. I couldn't bend her arm. And my son was in the room with us. He would sleep in the room with us a lot of the times. She liked him close. And I remember just losing it. And I called my dad on the phone. I said, "She's not going to make it." I said, "This is it." You know, I remember just screaming. And I felt horrible afterwards because I know I panicked my son. But I remember him coming back in the room after I got off the phone. And I said to him, "Brendan, she probably will not survive this after today." And he didn't cry. I think he needed to be strong for me. But, you know, it's so eerie. Even her dog, because dog knew something was wrong. He didn't bark that morning. He didn't do anything. He just, you know. But, so again, her hospice nurse who was off came. And another came and he said, "What do you want to do? You know, do you want to take her into the hospital?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "She can't die here." You know, initially I thought I might want her to pass away peacefully at home, but when I saw the panic in my son's eyes, I knew that couldn't happen. And, you know, it was just so crazy because I knew that we were nearing the end. I didn't know how close. So we, you know, it's kind of funny because even up until the very end, she did show these glimpses of her little sassy personality. Her hospice nurse went to check her pupils with her pen light. Mia snatched her pen light. So, you know, and it was like, okay, my girl's still there. You know, maybe there's a little bit of hope. But again, my mama heart knew it was the end for her. I just didn't know how close. So we take an ambulance ride to the hospital, and still all this time, you know, her breathing is 2 breaths and then a long pause. So we get to the hospital and they get her in, you know, they take her down for a CT scan, and she made a couple of grunts, you know, on the way down. She knew where she was going. Mia had been in this hospital so many times, and down this route, she knew the look of the hallways. And she would say, "No pictures." She didn't want them taking pictures of her head. But she got her scan. And at this point, we're still in the emergency room. And I see her oncologist come down and she asked me, "Do you want to see the imaging?" I said, "Yes." And at this point, Mia's kind of just resting. She had gotten more pain meds to keep her comfortable. So her doctor, because initially the plan when we got there was to put a pick in her, to try to give her, you know, some meds and hopefully figure out another game plan. Her doctor pulled up her scan and she showed me the images and she said, "Death is more imminent than we thought." And her little brain had so much fluid in it, which is why she was in so much pain, while she was having so much trouble breathing. And her doctor said, you know, there's not really much we can do. She said, she asked me if I wanted to do anything. And I said, no, I won't put her on steroids again. I won't put her through getting PICC line again. At this point, I didn't have a choice but to accept that my daughter was about to die. And I remember laying and leaning over to her and telling her it was okay, that she could go. I apologized to her because I had truly felt like I failed her. Within moments of me telling her it was okay, her oxygen just dropped. Her oxygen went down to like 60. Her breathing got all choppy, and the nurses kind of scurried in and wanted to give her some morphine to help level out her breathing. They put oxygen on her. And, I knew when they went to give her the medicine, they went to start an IV and me, it didn't even budge. They poked her, she didn't budge. She was still alive, but I knew she wasn't fully there. And they got us, they rushed us upstairs to the oncology floor so that she could pass in peace, not in the hustle and bustle of the emergency room. And while they were getting her up to the floor, I said, let me hurry up and run to the bathroom, while they're getting her settled in bed. And it's crazy because I went to the bathroom and part of me just wanted to sit in there, cry it out, and get my thoughts together. But I knew I needed to get back to her. So I walked back to her room and I looked at her and her lips were blue. And I asked her doctor, I said, is she dying right now? She said, yeah. So I got in the bed with her and I just laid there with her. I kissed her as many times as I could. And I couldn't say much other than I loved her, but I just sat there holding her. And the doctor had the nurses station turn off the monitors, so that alarms and bells and whistles weren't going off. But the first time the doctor came and listened for her heartbeat, she was still there. Her heartbeat was faint, but she was still there. And the second time she came back, she was gone. So I lay there in that hospital bed with my daughter in my arms until she took her last breath. And I swear, I'm like, that is something no parent should have to ever, ever, ever do. I remember thinking to myself, how am I going to go back home to my son and tell him that she's not coming back? I sat there for, an hour or two at least, just holding her. I changed her clothes. I wiped her down. I changed her diaper. The child life department came in and we were able to do some memory things. I say one of the things that we did, we took the imprint of her little feet and her hand and pressed them into the clay. And I was so thankful to the child life department at that point, because when they came in, they treated her the same way they did when she was alive. They didn't treat her like they were handling a corpse. They treated her like she was the Mia that they knew. But it was just so, I just couldn't stop holding her, even though I knew she wasn't in that body anymore. And when it was time to leave the hospital, I felt guilty, for leaving her body. In my mind, I kept saying, like, she's going to be so terrified I'm not there, but I knew I had to go home and get my son. So, it was just telling him, I think, of course, it hurt losing her, but I think Mia knew that she had to make the decision and go out on her own terms, that I would never be able to make the decision to stop treatment. it had to be hers. And she truly, she waited for me to be okay with it, to die. But, telling my son, it was horrible. I remember recording a video before going home. And I didn't post it, until after I told Brendan. But, I remember making that video and saying, by the time you guys see this, he'll know. And I remember as I was making the video, he texted me twice asking how was Mia. And she was dead in my arms. And again, this was not even 4 months ago. She passed on May 20th. And, I remember the next morning calling the hospital and asking, was her body still there? And they said it was. And I'm like, she has got to be, I'm still in mom mode. I'm still her mother. Like, she's got to be so terrified. But I went to the funeral home that was going to handle her arrangements that next morning. And as I was sitting there, her body arrived. And I was able to see her. They opened her up at the hospital because I did agree to donate organs if any were viable. But thankfully, I could only see her from here up. But she looked the same. She looked like her sweet self. But I was able to see her and to kiss her one last time and to say goodbye again. It was very weird, seeing her laid out. Kissing her was very different. She was cold, ice cold. But it just, you never think of saying goodbye to your children. You think about your children burying you. You don't bury your kids. And, with all the COVID stuff, of course, everyone's reaching out to me. Are you doing a funeral? Are you doing services? And, it's funny because I didn't even really think about the pandemic. But I didn't hold a funeral or anything for Mia because I said, you know what? I've said goodbye to my daughter twice. I tucked her in and laid her in that hospital bed, after she died. And I said goodbye to her. And I said goodbye to her again at the funeral home. I said I wasn't going to do it again. And I know that was hard for family and friends, but at that point, I had to protect me more than anything. I had to protect my son too. So, and then, and life has forever changed. Doing things like shopping for a tiny urn is something no parent should have to do. I remember going to so many places because nobody had an urn that was small enough. It was either too tiny or it was too big. Just the whole process of everything was just, it still feels very unreal. I wake up every morning, and I don't know if you can see behind me, but instead of waking up to my daughter, who I slept with every night, who I kissed good morning every morning, I don't wake up to her face. I wake up to her urn. It's so crazy. I slept on my couch for 3 months because I couldn't sleep in my bed without her. I moved because I couldn't keep waking up in that apartment where, that felt so empty because her presence wasn't there to fill it. It's, and days and moments I feel like I'm okay. And then it's like just this wave washes over me and I realize I'll never be okay again. A piece of me is forever gone. And I look at, all the things she went through and how much she suffered, and her suffering is of course so much greater than what I'm going through and what I'll ever go through. But, it's just, it's not easy. Um, even the simplest of things. I have a big giant picture of her on the fireplace, over the mantle. And the other kept, and he sat and he just stared and stared at her picture. And he kept looking at me like, where is she? He still sniffs her things. He still looks for her. It's just this unreal feeling. And I, wake up every day and it's like a slap in the face. Like, my daughter is really gone. Not just gone, but dead. And it just doesn't seem fair.
Um, no, it doesn't seem fair, Michelle. And last week, the mom that was here, she made a statement, and it's so real, so true. She said the sound of silence is so loud, and it is. When you get back home and you're used to hearing all these things, hearing your child playing around, and see, that's things that we took for granted, that a lot of people take for granted, and now we wish that we could be there, that we could hear those sounds, that we can see the writings on the wall, that everything that they used to do. And you also touched on a point that say, when you said that it's crazy to think that a child should have a bucket list. They shouldn't have that bucket list. Our children deserve a whole lot more than what they got, and it still just blows my mind how a lot of these facilities, a lot of these hospitals are not ready to treat something like this, or they say we don't know what to do, or we're running out of options. um that's just I don't know, that's just unfortunate, and it's so difficult to see your child go through that. And I know that feeling exactly, because my daughter needed, to be sedated for radiation as well, and just feeling that body go limb, and it's an ugly feeling. It's a bad feeling, and I don't know, it's things that are gonna haunt you every day. It's things that are gonna keep you up at night, and it's just something that, like you said, no parent should go through. Just a couple of questions here before we finish. Your son, he's 11. You were talking about him, and how, we have a lot of parents that the child also had brothers or sisters. um, how is he doing? What kind of help are you getting for him, or how are you going about that?
So, honestly, he has done way better than I expected. I must say, I guess I just birthed very strong kids. Um, but I think a big part of it is, I know that he felt he needed to be strong for me. And even I'd tell him, no, it's my job to be strong for you. But I know, he kind of looks at himself like, I'm the man of the house. And but I think the biggest thing for him, I try to just let him know that I'm here, that it's okay if he's sad, or I'm always here for what he needs. The other thing is, we talk about Mia all the time. I think sometimes it hurts so much. It's like you almost want to forget, even though, yes, you never want to forget your baby, but at the same time, it's hard to sit with the hurt. It is heavy. And, I try to, I make it a point to talk about her. No matter what, she is a part of our family. She will always be. We still have so many of her things up, and around. I made it a point to allow him to pick items of hers that he wanted. Um, we're about to start a virtual support group. Because of COVID, they are not doing in person just yet. I've asked him in the past if he wanted to do a support group or talk to someone, and he's made it very clear that he didn't. Even when she was going through treatment, he made it very clear he didn't want to know certain things. He didn't want to talk about the actual diagnosis. He just wanted to be with her. But it's hard because I don't always know what he's feeling, and I can't fix it when he's hurting. There have been moments where I know he's struggling, and I let him know that I'm here, but I can't fix it, and I'm just very thankful that he is as strong as he is, because if he wasn't, I don't know what I'd do. I honestly don't.
Wow, and he sounds like an amazing young man, and I know this is gonna help him, and I know he's gonna be doing great things as well. Um, a lot of similarities with the story of your Mia and my Mia. I am too in the medical field, and I have been for 18 years, but you can relate to this, to where we know more than we need to, but yet we don't know enough, and that it could be good and that can be bad, and it's just being in that situation is so difficult. It is. And again, we're talking about just a couple of months ago that your baby girl left, so it's all still fresh to you. So just thank you so much, Michelle, for sharing this, for sharing that powerful story. And because again, we need to talk about our children. We need to tell their stories. We need to let people know what this monster called cancer is doing to our children, and know it is not just a commercial that you see on TV. It's not. It's a lot more that goes behind all that. Now, Michelle, I know Mia does have a Facebook page. Are you also involved with any like nonprofit organizations? Do you do work with it? I know right now, because of this whole COVID thing, we're not able to do a lot of things. But is there any organizations that you that did help you out, or that you want to help out, or that you want to mention, so we can go ahead and post about them and have people check into them?
So I am not a part of any organizations at the moment. I did my best to share her story and really in detail throughout her journey. And I must say, advocacy is much easier when your child's alive, emotionally. I do my best to continue to share, but I must say it's getting harder. But what I do is try to donate when I can. And I have a couple of small businesses that I run on my own. And for Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, I let all of my customers know that for every purchase, a set amount would be donated to a particular charity who's working toward a cure. For me, of course, DIPG is very close to my heart because it's the monster that stole my daughter. And this month, I plan on donating to the Michael Mosier Foundation, so the Defeat DIPG. They have been extremely helpful, not just, advocacy and everything, all the work that they do to fight toward a cure. They lost their son, Michael, to DIPG. But all throughout, yes, they helped financially. They're just amazing people. And, it truly amazes me how they're able to do so much through the pain. So they are definitely one. And I'm hoping to be able to do, more with them in the future. And then the other is the Hayes Tough Foundation. And again, here is an amazing family who knows the same heartbreak that I'm feeling right now, and they've taken that to do some good. Um, so, again, there are several out there. Those are two that are extremely close to my heart. And I think with my businesses, not just for September, but for now on, it will be my norm to a portion of proceeds from every purchase will go and be donated to help find a cure for DIPG.
Well, yeah, thank you for sharing that, Michelle. So when you give me the information, I'll go ahead and post all those links here for when we do these when this video is uploaded. Again, when family, when we do these things, of course, we've gone through something like this, and just as Michelle was sharing with us, the advocacy that we do, for us to be doing what we're doing, we have gone through something very bad, and some parents are currently still going through that because their children are battling this. And when you help these smaller organizations, not these big corporations that you see, you know exactly where your money's going, and you know exactly who's being helped, that you're not paying other things that do not need to be paid. You know exactly where these funds are going. And these funds, every parent that's gone through it has had a certain organization help them with anything, with care packages, with gas cards, with food cards. And trust me, those things, as small as they might seem, they do help a lot, especially when you're in the hospital, especially when you don't want to leave your child's side because you don't know what might happen. So, when these organizations come in and help you out, they're such a blessing, and they've been such a blessing, and they will continue to be a blessing to a lot of other families. So just make sure that you know exactly where you're donating, and all these organizations that Michelle is talking about, I'm going to go ahead and put in the description so you guys can click on there, check them out, and if God touches your heart, then you can help out in any way. They would really, really appreciate it. Michelle, before we leave, do you have anything else? What do you want to leave us with? What do you tell any parent right now? What can you leave us with?
I think the biggest thing is, be an advocate for your children, whether they're healthy or sick. It's crazy, but, I talk about my mama heart all the time, but, my mama heart knew all throughout her journey. I knew when things weren't right. I knew when I needed to push to figure out what was going on with my baby. And even now that she's gone, my mama heart still bleeds. And, for those of you, whether it's your children have been impacted, or, someone else who has a little fighter or has lost a little fighter, be by them, be by their side. They may seem very strong. They may not tell you when they need something, but your presence is needed and wanted. It is a very hard road to walk down. And when your child's going through it, there's so many people there, so many. And after your child dies, your world stands still, and you realize that everybody else's continues to spin. So I think the big thing is to remember the families, especially after a loss, because they're going to need you even more after that loss, just to be present than they ever know.
You're very right, Michelle, and I have mentioned it in other episodes before that while our child is going through things, yes, you do have all the support, but once your child passes, it seems that support's been gone. And I don't know if people are afraid to come up to us and ask us about our children or ask us, but I can tell you, I've received messages when I've really needed them. People just saying, "Hey, I'm here for you. Hey, you want to talk? Hey, you want to grab some coffee?" And those little things, trust me, for us that are going through this situation, really does help us out a lot. So that's exactly what I wanted to do here with the Gold Corner, is to create this family, create this platform, to be able to speak about our warriors as they were, as they are, fighters and warriors, the real heroes. And to create this family, to know that we're not alone, that there's other people that have gone through certain things and these type of things, and we're here for each other. you know um so it just, as Michelle was mentioning, don't be afraid. If you know a family that has suffered a loss, especially of a child, don't be afraid to talk to them. Don't be afraid to go up to them. Don't be afraid to send them a text message, to call them up, because at times we really, really need them. So again, I just want to thank everybody for tuning in this week. I want to thank Michelle for her powerful testimony, for that powerful, heartbreaking story. I am going to be tagging her when I do the description video, and when we do upload on Sunday. So if you want to chat with her a little bit more, you can always connect with her on her Facebook. I will also be putting the Facebook of our beautiful Mia Grace here as well, so you guys can check out the journey. You guys can see this little girl, see her smile, and see her videos. It'll bring a smile to your heart, not only to your face, but to your heart. When you see a child that's going through something like this and they can still smile, you're seeing what God can do. You're seeing the hand of God move. Now, again, I'm not here to preach religion. I believe religion divides people. I'm here to talk to you about a relationship with God, because once you have that relationship, it makes you see things a whole lot different. It makes you value, and it makes you cherish things, especially with how the world is going right now. You just got to keep your faith. You got to keep that trust in God, and knowing, for us parents that have gone through something like this, that we will see our children again, and that our children are pain free right now, and they're running around, and they're happier than they ever could be here, even with 3 or 4 or 5 visits to Disneyland. Wherever they are right now, they're having a lot better time that they would ever here. So again, just remember to pray for your children, pray for your family. Let's pray for our nation. Let's pray for everything that's going on. Remember to live each day to its fullest, because tomorrow is not promised. And as I tell you all every week, just hold on a little while longer, because we're almost home. Thank you all. We'll see you next week. God bless you.